My husband left me while I cared for my dying father. Now he wants my wealth. I'm a 36-year-old woman, married for 8 years, with 2 children. Along with this, I'm the only daughter of my ailing father. My dad had been suffering from kidney problems for many years, but in the last 2 to 3 years, his condition had worsened, requiring dialysis twice a week. Initially, Dad was able to manage his appointments on his own, but over the last year, he often asked me to accompany him. As he grew weaker, I decided to make it a priority to take him to every dialysis session. Saturdays, my day off, and Wednesday evenings, when I had special permission from my boss to leave work early, became dedicated to my father. I made up the extra hours at work late at night after returning home. My boss, who had known me for over a decade, appreciated my dedication and flexibility, so the arrangement worked well. The real problem, however, lay at home. My husband, Greg, 38, was far from supportive. When he learned about my new routine, his frustration and resentment grew. For some context, my father had been a successful businessman, owning a thriving merchandising company. After high school, he wanted me to take over the business, but I was passionate about technology and pursued a degree in software engineering instead. Despite his disappointment, I followed my dreams and began working for a prominent tech firm after graduation. My refusal to join his company created tension between us. Dad felt that I was rejecting not just the business, but also the family legacy. His frustrations reached a breaking point after my marriage, when he gave me one last chance to join the business. I declined again, and he angrily declared that he would remove me from his will and donate his wealth to charity. I stood by my decision, confident in my ability to create a stable life for myself. By the age of 29, I had bought a house and a car, proving to myself that I could succeed without his wealth. Our relationship soured after this, but when my mother passed away 5 years ago, everything changed. Her sudden death left Dad devastated, and I began reconnecting with him, visiting often with my children. This renewed bond helped us move past some of the bitterness. Greg, however, had little patience for my parents. He rarely visited, and when he did, it was clear he didn't care for them. After my father's declaration to disinherit me, Greg openly criticized him, calling him selfish and unreasonable. I repeatedly told Greg to stay out of my relationship with my father, but he refused, claiming it was about our future and the children's inheritance. When I started accompanying Dad to dialysis, Greg's objections became unbearable. He accused me of wasting my time, insisting that my father had already removed me from his will. His logic was cold and profit-driven. If Dad wasn't leaving me anything, why bother caring for him? His behavior worsened. On Saturdays, Greg would deliberately create conflicts by planning family outings, hosting parties, or demanding I run errands. When I reminded him that Saturdays were dedicated to Dad's appointments, he would sulk or lash out. Wednesdays were no better. Greg often left the children at home, claiming he had urgent social events, leaving me to juggle their care, cooking, and my late-night work commitments after a full day of stress. Despite his antagonism, I continued to prioritize my father. Dad noticed my constant rushing and suggested he go with his nurse instead, but I refused. These car rides were often the only moments we could spend together, and I wasn't willing to give them up. However, Greg's constant harassment began to take its toll. I found myself speeding through traffic just to get home faster, sacrificing precious time with Dad to avoid Greg's tantrums. The situation escalated when Greg demanded I choose between him and my father. He argued that my father was dying soon, and I should focus on the family that would be there forever. His insensitivity shocked me. I told him, I'd rather choose my father than someone as heartless as you. Furious, he packed his bags and left. I didn't try to stop him. In his absence, I managed the house, my children, my job, and my father's care. Surprisingly, I felt a sense of relief without Greg's constant complaints. A few days later, I received divorce papers. I signed them immediately and sent them back without hesitation. Greg called, furious that I hadn't begged him to come back. It was laughable. What shocked me most was that Greg didn't even ask for custody of the children. When his mother called to berate me, claiming I should have tried harder to save the marriage, I reminded her that Greg had abandoned not just me, but also his own children. Without Greg, life became more peaceful. I moved into my father's house with my children. This decision was transformative. Dad thrived with the presence of his grandchildren, and they adored spending time with him. His caregiver even agreed to help look after the kids, making it easier for me to balance everything. Greg, meanwhile, seemed to underestimate my resilience. He likely expected me to struggle, but instead, I found joy and fulfillment in my new life. Divorce turned out to be a blessing. A few months later, Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was devastating, but I took comfort in knowing he spent his final months surrounded by love and laughter. Shortly after his death, I was called to his lawyer's office regarding his will. I assumed everything would go to charity, as Dad had once threatened. To my shock, I learned that Dad had never changed his will. I was still his sole heir. The lawyer explained that Dad had always intended for me to inherit his wealth, business, and house. Overwhelmed with emotion, I realized that his threats to disinherit me had been a way of motivating me to follow my dreams. Dad's lawyer revealed that he had been proud of my independence and passion. His business was now mine, and I decided to honor his legacy by taking over the company. News of my inheritance spread quickly, and visitors began pouring in, old friends, distant relatives, and, to my surprise, Greg and his parents. Greg showed up sobbing, claiming he missed the children and wanted to reconcile. His parents tried to guilt me, saying the kids needed a father. I laughed and told him, "You don't miss me or the kids. You miss the money." Greg, offended, threatened legal action, demanding half of my inheritance. I consulted my lawyer, who assured me Greg had no claim, as the divorce was finalized long before the inheritance. Greg hasn't contacted me since his outburst, and I couldn't be happier. I've taken over my father's business and am building a life that honors his memory. My children and I are planning a vacation to the Bahamas to create happy new memories. This journey has taught me the value of resilience and self-worth. Family isn't about blood. It's about love, loyalty, and showing up for the people who matter most. My father's legacy reminds me of that every day.